Marcus always said the pool was his little piece of heaven. It wasn't one of those grand, fancy pools you see in magazines. No waterfalls, no big diving boards, no lights that changed colors at night. Just a simple, clean rectangle of water behind his modest two-bedroom home. But to Marcus it meant everything. After 12-hour shifts as a paramedic, coming home to that quiet backyard was like stepping into another world. He would drop his keys on the kitchen counter, kick off his shoes, and walk straight outside. The water would glisten in the sun during the day, and at night the moonlight would dance across its surface. Sometimes he would just sit on the edge, his tired feet dipped into the cool water, and listen to the crickets singing in the distance. It was peace, pure and simple. Marcus didn't ask for much in life. He wasn't loud. He didn't throw parties. He didn't blast music like some of the other neighbors. He worked hard, paid his bills, and tried to live quietly. He had bought this house 5 years ago, saved up every dollar to make it his own. The pool had been the one luxury he allowed himself, and he maintained it meticulously, cleaning it every week, keeping the water crystal clear. But the neighborhood itself, that was a different story. It was a nice area on the surface. Rows of neat houses with trimmed lawns, little flags waving on mailboxes, kids riding bikes on the sidewalks. To anyone driving by, it looked like the perfect suburban dream. But Marcus knew better. Not everyone in the neighborhood welcomed him with open arms. He was one of the few black homeowners there, and while some neighbors were polite enough, there was always this feeling. The kind of feeling where you notice the long stares when you walk by, the sudden silence when you join a conversation, the way some people smile at you with their mouths but not their eyes. And then, of course, there was Linda. Linda was the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. She had appointed herself as president of the Homeowners Association, though Marcus sometimes wondered if anyone had ever actually voted for her. She was always patrolling the streets with her clipboard, visor shading her sharp eyes, looking for violations. Grass too long? She'd leave a note. Trash bins not pulled in fast enough? She'd take a picture and send it to the HOA group chat. Marcus had dealt with her little complaints for years. Once, she knocked on his door because she claimed his car looked too old for the neighborhood. Another time, she emailed him about water spots on his driveway after he washed his truck. Most of the time, he ignored her. She wasn't worth the energy. But despite her constant pettiness, Marcus never let her ruin his sanctuary. When he was by his pool, Linda and her clipboard didn't exist. There, he could breathe. On this particular Friday afternoon, the sun was golden and warm. Marcus had just gotten home from a long shift. It had been a rough day, 2 car accidents, a heart attack call, and an elderly patient he couldn't save. His heart was heavy, his body sore. All he wanted was a quiet evening. By his pool, he poured himself a cold glass of lemonade, stepped outside, and felt the tension begin to melt away. Little did he know that peace he loved so much was about to be shattered, because just as he closed his eyes and let out a deep sigh, there came a sharp, insistent knock at his front door, the kind of knock that didn't ask, it demanded. And Marcus already had a sinking feeling about who it might be. Marcus opened the front door slowly, already bracing himself. And there she was, Linda, standing tall on his porch like she owned the place. A crisp white blouse tucked into beige shorts, sunglasses perched on her head, and that ever-present clipboard clutched under her arm. "Marcus," she said sharply, skipping any form of greeting. "We need to talk." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, tired from his shift and not in the mood. "Evening, Linda, what's the problem this time? My grass a millimeter too high?" She ignored the jab. "Tomorrow is the HOA summer party. You know, the annual event for the entire neighborhood?" Marcus frowned. "I've heard about it. What about it?" Linda straightened her shoulders as though preparing to make an announcement. "We'll be using your pool." The words hit Marcus like a slap. "Excuse me." "It's the only pool in the neighborhood large enough for everyone," she said briskly, as if this were already settled. "It's for the community. Everyone will be here. Food, drinks, kids playing. It's a tradition, Marcus. You'll need to have it ready by noon tomorrow. Clean, of course. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. You're not asking me. You're telling me. Linda sighed impatiently as though he were being difficult for no reason. It's just one day. Be a team player for once. It's for the good of the neighborhood. You should feel proud to contribute. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest. He had worked for every penny that bought this house. That pool wasn't some community playground, it was his escape. And now this woman stood on his porch acting like she had the right to take it. My pool is private, he said evenly. I'm not hosting your party. Linda's mouth tightened. Marcus, don't be unreasonable. Everyone expects it. People have already planned for this. That's not my problem, he replied. You should have asked before you planned anything. Something ugly flashed in her eyes. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, though there was no kindness in it. You people never want to cooperate, do you? Marcus froze. He knew exactly what she meant, and the weight of those words stung like a whip. For a moment he said nothing, just stared at her, his jaw tight. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but cold. Get off my porch, Linda. Linda blinked, caught, off guard by his tone. Excuse me? You heard me? Marcus said, taking a step forward. You don't get to come to my home, make demands, and insult me. The answer is no. Now leave. For a split second, Linda looked uncertain, but then her face hardened again. Fine, she spat. But this isn't over, Marcus. Not by a long shot. She turned on her heel and stormed off, her sandals slapping against the driveway as she disappeared down the street. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. He hated confrontations like that. They left a bitter taste in his mouth, made his chest tight. He just wanted to be left alone, to have one place in the world that was truly his. But deep down, he knew Linda wouldn't let this go. People like her never did. He walked out to the backyard again and looked at the shimmering water of his pool, reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. It should have brought him peace. Instead, all he could feel was a storm brewing on the horizon. Tomorrow was going to be a fight. He just didn't know how ugly it would get. Marcus woke the next morning feeling uneasy. The sunlight filtered softly through his curtains, but it didn't bring the peace it usually did. Something told him today wouldn't be quiet. He brewed himself a cup of coffee and stepped out into his backyard. The pool sparkled in the early light, calm and inviting. He wished he could spend the whole day floating there, ignoring the world. But his phone buzzed. Again and again. He picked it up and saw a flood of emails and text messages from the HOA board. Marcus, it's disappointing you're refusing to cooperate with a community event. Your behavior will be noted in the next HOA meeting. We'll have to review possible violations on your property. Selfishness like this reflects poorly on you. Marcus sighed heavily, tossing the phone onto the patio table. So Linda had rallied the troops. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about control. He had seen this pattern before. People, like her, didn't like to be told no, especially not by someone like him. He tried to ignore it, tried to focus on watering his plants, but the anxiety crawled under his skin like ants. He knew it wouldn't stop. He was right. Around noon, voices came from the front yard, loud, insistent. Marcus went to the door and found Linda standing there again, this time with two other HOA board members, a tall man in a polo shirt and a woman in a floral dress. They didn't bother with pleasantries. Marcus, Linda began, her tone clipped. We're here to finalize the arrangements for today's setup. Marcus blinked slowly. What part of no didn't you understand? The man in the polo stepped forward. Look, we don't want trouble, but the community has certain expectations. This party is tradition. Everyone's counting on it. I never agreed to host your tradition, Marcus replied calmly, though his hands were tightening into fists at his sides. The woman in the floral dress chimed in. Do you really want to be that neighbor? The one who ruins it for everyone. Marcus felt something snap inside. Ruins it for everyone? Or refuses to let himself be bullied? Because those aren't the same thing. Linda scoffed. We're not bullying you. We're asking for a Simple favor one day out of the year. And frankly, Marcus, if you cared about fitting in here, you'd understand. Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. I didn't buy this house to fit in. I bought it to have my own space. My pool is private. This conversation is over. He turned to close the door, but Linda's voice stopped him. It was cold, sharp as a knife. You can't stop us, she said. If you refuse, we'll escalate this matter. There are rules about being part of this community, and you're not above them. Marcus slowly opened the door wider, stepping onto the porch. His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. You're right, he said quietly. I can't stop you from trying, but I can stop you from ever touching what's mine. They exchanged a long, tense stare before Linda huffed and stormed off, the other two following reluctantly. Marcus stood there for a moment, chest rising and falling with restrained anger. Then, without another thought, he walked to his backyard, grabbed the pump he used for cleaning the pool, and began connecting it to the drain outlet. As the first trickle of water started to flow out of the pool, Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one, but on his terms. By tonight, there would be no pool left for anyone to claim. The sun was blazing by noon, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer. Marcus sat on his back porch, sipping iced tea, watching the last streams of water trickle out of his pool. The once perfect blue rectangle was now a hollow basin, its tiled bottom exposed to the sunlight. It looked strange, almost sad. But Marcus felt no regret. He had been up half the night listening to the steady hum of the pump as it drained away his sanctuary. Every gallon that flowed out felt like taking back control. They couldn't use what no longer existed. Just as he finished his drink, the sound of voices drifted into the yard, laughter, chatter, the rustle of people carrying things. Then came Linda's voice, loud and commanding. "Set the tables near the pool," she shouted from the other side of the fence. Marcus leaned back in his chair and waited. Moments later, the gate creaked open without so much as a knock. Linda marched in, her bright yellow sundress fluttering in the hot breeze, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Behind her came a few other neighbors carrying coolers and folding chairs. She took 2 steps into the yard, stopped, and froze. The pool, her party, centerpiece was gone. What is this?" she stammered, ripping off her sunglasses. "Where's the water?" Marcus stood slowly, his face calm but unreadable. "Drained it," he said simply. "You what?" Her voice shot up an octave. "I told you," Marcus replied, evenly. "You're not using my pool, so I made sure you can't." Linda's face turned crimson. "Are you insane? Do you know how much work went into planning this party? How many people are coming? You've ruined everything." "That's not my problem," Marcus said, crossing his arms. By now, a few neighbors had stopped what they were doing and were peeking over the fence or lingering awkwardly by the gate. Some whispered to each other, clearly entertained by the spectacle. Linda, however, was beyond reason. She jabbed a finger at Marcus. "This is sabotage. You're deliberately undermining the HOA. I could sue you." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sue me for what? For not letting you trespass on my property?" "You're being selfish," she screamed. "This community is supposed to be about sharing and cooperation." Marcus's eyes darkened. "Funny," he said quietly, "because when I moved here, none of you shared a welcome. None of you cooperated when I was treated like I didn't belong. And now, suddenly, I'm supposed to hand over my piece to make you happy?" The yard fell silent. Even the whispers stopped. Linda's face twisted with fury. "Fine," she spat. "If you want to play dirty, we'll do this the hard way." She pulled out her phone and dialed. "Yes, this is Linda from the Brookside HOA," she said loudly, pacing. "We have a hostile resident refusing access to community resources. He's being aggressive. Send someone immediately." Marcus's stomach tightened as he realized what she was doing, lying to the police. He felt a rush of anger and fear but forced himself to remain still. When she hung up, she smirked. "Cops are on their way. Let's see how brave you are then." Marcus didn't respond. He simply walked back to his porch, sat down and took another sip of his iced tea. If this was going to escalate, he would face it head on. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens cut through the summer air. The showdown was about to begin. The sirens grew louder until a black and white cruiser pulled up in front of Marcus's house. The summer air, once filled with chatter, now hung heavy with silence. Neighbors lingered at their fences, phones in hand, ready to record. Linda practically ran to the officers as they stepped out of the car. "Thank goodness you're here," she cried, her voice trembling with fake distress. "It's him, Marcus. He's been aggressive, threatening. He drained the community pool just to ruin our event." Marcus stood slowly from his chair and walked toward the gate. He kept his hands visible, his movements calm. Inside, his heart pounded like a drum, but he refused to let her see his fear. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm demeanor, looked between Linda and Marcus. "Sir," he said, "can we talk to you for a moment?" "Of course," Marcus replied, his voice steady. Linda butted in, pointing at him with theatrical outrage. "He's dangerous. He refused to cooperate with the HOA, and when we asked to use the pool, he attacked me verbally. This is community property, and he's destroying it out of spite." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Community property?" He reached into his back pocket slowly and pulled out a folded document. "This is my deed, my property, my pool. Would you like to see it?" The officer took the papers, scanned them briefly, then looked at Marcus. "Is there any reason you refused access today?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. "Because they never asked. They demanded. They planned a party in my backyard without my consent. I work long hours. This is my home, my peace. I told them no, that's all." Linda threw her hands in the air. "He's lying. He's trying to make me look like the bad guy." The second officer, a woman with sharp eyes, spoke for the first time. "Ma'am, did you have written permission to use his pool?" Linda hesitated, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Well, no, but it's tradition. Everyone expected it." "That's not the same as permission," the officer replied flatly. Linda's face reddened. "Are you seriously taking his side? Look at what he's done. He drained the pool just to spite us." Marcus's gaze hardened. "I drained my pool because you wouldn't take no for an answer. You tried to take something. That wasn't yours. That ends today." The tall officer handed the deed back to Marcus and turned to Linda. "Ma'am, there's no crime here. This is private property. He has every right to do as he pleases with it. We suggest you leave before this becomes a harassment issue." The words hit Linda like a slap. She stood frozen for a moment, then sputtered, "This isn't over," before storming out of the yard, her face pale with rage. The neighbors who had been watching began to murmur, some shaking their heads at Linda, others giving Marcus subtle nods of respect. For the first time, Marcus felt the weight on his chest lighten. The female officer looked at him kindly. "Sorry you had to deal with that, sir. Some people just don't respect boundaries." Marcus gave a small smile. "Thank you, officers. Really." When the cruiser drove away and the street quieted down, Marcus stood alone in his backyard. The pool was still empty, but for the first time he didn't see loss. He saw freedom. Linda could threaten, gossip, and rage all she wanted, but she couldn't take what wasn't hers. Not anymore. Still, deep down, Marcus knew this wasn't the end. People like her never truly let go, but he was ready for whatever came next. That evening, the neighborhood was strangely quiet. The party Linda had boasted about for weeks never happened. The tables, decorations, and coolers were all gone, leaving the community park deserted. Marcus sat on the edge of his drained pool, legs dangling into the empty basin. The tiles were cool beneath his hands, but his heart felt heavy. He should have felt victorious. He had stood up for himself, defended what was his, and the police had taken his side. But instead of triumph, there was only exhaustion. He leaned back, staring up at the darkening sky as the first stars began to appear. The quiet should have comforted him, but it didn't. All he could think about was how close things had come to going very, very wrong. One phone call. That's all it took. One false accusation from Linda, and he could have been another story on the evening news. He had seen it happen to others, neighbors calling the police for no reason, lives ruined in moments because someone decided to twist a story. The thought made his stomach churn. He remembered the look in Linda's eyes when she said, "You people never want to cooperate." It had been a small moment, maybe unnoticed by others, but for Marcus, it said everything. She hadn't just wanted his pool, she wanted control. She wanted to remind him that in her eyes he didn't belong. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands, trying to push away the rising frustration. "Why does it have to be like this?" he muttered under his breath. He thought about the years he had spent here, cutting the grass perfectly, keeping his home spotless, always polite, always careful not to give anyone a reason to complain. Yet no matter how hard he tried, it was never enough. The pool had been his escape, a small sanctuary in a world that sometimes felt too loud, too unfair. Now even that felt tainted. A soft rustle made him glance toward the fence. His elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patel, stood there holding a plate covered in foil. She smiled kindly. "Marcus," she called softly, "I made samosas today. Thought you might like some." He hesitated, then got up and walked over. When he took the plate, she reached out and squeezed his hand gently. "You did the right thing," she said. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Her simple words cracked something inside him. He swallowed hard, blinking back the sudden sting in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. That night, Marcus sat on his porch with the plate of samosas beside him, staring at the empty pool. He thought about how much this place had meant to him when he bought it, how he had dreamed of peace, of building a home where he could simply exist without judgment. But peace here felt like a fight he had to win over and over again. He was tired. By midnight, he had made up his mind. He would sell the house. He would leave this neighborhood behind. Not because they had beaten him, but because he deserved more than constant battles for basic respect. He looked at the hollow pool one, last time under the moonlight, and whispered to himself, "It's just water. I'll find another." And for the first time all day, he felt a small, quiet sense of freedom. A week later, a bright red for sale sign stood in Marcus's front yard. It swayed gently in the summer breeze, the word bold and final. The decision hadn't been easy, but once he made it, Marcus felt lighter, like a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Some were surprised he was leaving, others weren't. A few neighbors, like Mrs. Patel, stopped by to say kind words, but most stayed silent, peering from behind curtains, their curiosity stronger than their compassion. Marcus spent his last morning walking through the house. Each room held memories. The small living room where he'd watched late-night movies after long shifts, the kitchen where he'd experimented with new recipes, the backyard where he'd floated on summer nights, staring up at the stars. He paused at the sliding glass door, looking out at the pool, now refilled, clear and still. It shimmered like nothing had ever happened, but Marcus knew better. He stepped outside, knelt by the edge, and let his hand glide across the cool surface. "You kept me sane," he whispered to himself, almost as if the water could hear him. "But it's time to move on." As he stood, a voice called from the front yard. "Linda." She was leaning against her car, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She didn't look victorious. If anything, she looked unsettled. "So, you're leaving," she said flatly. Marcus walked to the fence, stopping a few feet away. "Yeah, I am." Linda tilted her head, searching for words. "You didn't have to do this. You could have just gotten along." Marcus gave a small, humorless laugh. "Gotten along? You mean give in. Let you take what you wanted because it was easier than fighting back." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is a community, Marcus. We all have to make sacrifices." He met her gaze, unflinching. "I sacrificed enough just to be here. And it was never enough for you, was it?" For once, Linda didn't respond. Maybe she had no comeback, or maybe she didn't want to admit he was right. Marcus didn't wait for her to speak again. He turned, walked to his car, and loaded the last box from his living room. When he closed the trunk, he glanced around the neighborhood one last time. The houses stood in perfect rows, lawns manicured, driveways spotless. On the surface, it all looked so peaceful. But to him, it was a place where he'd always been watched, always judged, always made to feel like an outsider in his own home. He climbed into his car, started the engine, and let out a long breath. This wasn't running away. This was choosing himself over their control. As he drove down the street, Mrs. Patel waved from her porch, her smile warm and genuine. Marcus waved back, grateful for at least one soul who had shown kindness. When he passed Linda's house, she stood at the end of her driveway, arms still crossed, watching him go. He didn't stop. He didn't even look at her again. At the end of the street, he turned left and kept driving. The neighborhood shrank in his rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. Miles later, Marcus pulled over at a rest stop. He stepped out, stretched, and looked up at the wide-open sky. No fences, no prying eyes, just endless blue. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe freely. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Home isn't a place. It's peace. And I'll find it." With that, he got back in the car and drove toward a future that, for once, felt like it truly belonged to him.